were, if you remember, looking at Yud Zayin Amud Beis, so apologies. So if I fall asleep, you'll know why. It's, yeah, Yud Zayin Amud Beis? No, it's not. That's right. You need less sleep here, it seems. Yes. Let's have a look here. Remember, we were talking about. Let's just pick this up here. Yes, the last of the two narrow lines up, where it says Kei Rachum V'Chanun. And if you've got that. Yes, Kei Rachum V'Chanun, Omer Rabbi Yehuda. If you remember the end of those psukim there in Shemos that we were talking about last week, which was talking about the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, regarding the Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Bris Karusa, the Yud Gimel Midas. There's a Bris Karusa. What does that mean? There's a covenant which has been, if you like, almost cut, isn't it? Making a covenant. Because, well, we'll see the posuk in one moment. She'enon chosreis rekom. They do not leave empty-handed, as it were. She'nema hine anochi koreis baris. This follows on what we said last week. The power of those Yud Gimel Midas, and as we explained as well, is not just the Yud Gimel Midas that are just said. It's said with feeling, with concentration, and also bearing in mind that we should try and follow those midas ourselves. If we behave in this way, then we can ask and plea. And it sounds from here, there is a covenant with these Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim, that if we try and follow suit, then it will rebound back on us. We've seen this now for a couple of weeks. This idea, if midas tovas are done here, then it will come back on the individual. And there's the most wonderful Devar Torah. Maybe we'll have time at the end, although I don't want to go on too long. On this week's Seder, with this same principle that we constantly find by us, we talk about, remember, Midrash Oda Moeded, Moeded in Lo, we found this concept coming up constantly. This Gemara here comes up elsewhere too. This idea of how we behave, we've got this, this mirror effect. Hashem tzilcha ad yad yaminech, we find, remember that in Tehillim Chof Gimel, Hashem is your shadow, tzilcha ad yad yaminecha, and what's often the way that's often explained is, if we know in the shadow, or a shadow in particular, you put up a hand and you'll get, of course, a reflection, the shade of a hand. Put up just a few fingers, you'll have the reflection or the shade of a few fingers. Hashem is your sail, in the same principle, the same concept, that however much you do, it will come back on the individual. Hashem is waiting for us to behave in this way, full of compassion and concern and love for others, and then that will rebound back on us. And as I say, there's a wonderful Arachim on this week's Sedra that we'll see later on. But I think, Peter, we haven't got the facility of Sefaria today.
I've cracked it. Yes, we do.
Oh, and including, is it including those attachments I sent you?
If that's what you want, yes.
Oh, well, we're not up to there. Yeah. Oh, this is excellent. Good news. Okay, so let's crack on, and we'll come to that in a moment. Have a look here at the first wide line of the Gemara. Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Gedola Teshuvah. This is this Rabbi Yochanan statement. Of course, we know about Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, what's called Premier Division of the Amoraim. And he says the following: Teshuvah is great. Shemakaras Gazadino Shel Oidam. This is very powerful. What he's saying, we've seen this concept before, even if there is a Gazadin, which means a decree which is negative for the individual, particularly talking about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, nevertheless, Teshuvah can uproot that if it's sincere. Shenema, and we've got a posuk, This pasuk we've seen here, I've got it around the side. You probably do as well. In mine, it's Hashmein Lev Ha'om Hazeh, a pasuk from Isaiah. Hashmein. These are people, and the Nevuah there. Interesting in chapter 6, pasuk Yud. You may have it around the side, where it's talking about these people who really didn't want to do teshuvah, but at least we get the feeling of how powerful it might have been. These are people, Hashmei Nev Ha'om Hazeh. They are like their hearts, they're keeping full of shomein. Shomein is normally fat with, if you like, skin. They don't want to turn their hearts the right way. Hashmei Nev Ha'om Hazeh v'oznov hachbeid. And they are hard of hearing, koved, they're turning their eyes, and they don't want to do teshuvah, because if they would, and this is Isaiah giving them a rebuke, telling them, why don't you turn? You're not interested in doing teshuvah, because if you did, if you look with your eyes, uva oznov yishma, listen to words of rebuke, listen to words to try and perfect one's actions, or allow your heart to comprehend and understand how a person should be behaving, because if you did that, and did teshuvah, there would be a healing for him. Says the Gemara, maybe what Isaiah is telling them is if they would do teshuvah, this would help. If it's before the Gazar Din, which has been announced, if you like, in Shomayim, whatever the decree would be, who says afterwards? Answers Abaya, Omalei, V'rofoloi. Yeshaya says to them, Isaiah says to them, if you do teshuvah, you'd be healed. Healing, says the Gemara, Ezehu Dova, have you got it? 4 wide lines down in the Gemara. What is the matter? Shet Sorich Refuah. When do you need a healing? Says the Gemara, if there's already been a Gazar Din, then you need a healing of that decree. So what we're learning from here is that with teshuvah, even after the decree has been made, a change can take place and the decree can be changed too. Says the Gemara, we're not quite out of it yet. Says the Gemara Meisvei, 4 lines down. People have got the Meisvei. Meisvei. A brisa, Hashov Bein Tayim. Someone, this is talking about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, not that far away. Have a look at the Rashi, please, gentlemen, where it says Hashov Bein Tayim. If you've got the Rashi there in Normandy, hopefully. Good stuff. Bein Rosh Hashanah Liyom HaKippurim. If there's tshuva that's taken place, a person's preparing with sincerity to change their ways. That's what it means, Bein Tayim. Go back to the Gemara, please. Then Moichalin Loi, he's forgiven. But Lo Shov Bein Tayim, if the person does not do teshuvah, Afilu Hevi Kol Eile Nevoyos Sheba Olam. These are rams. Nevoyos was particularly known for their thick, fat rams that you're bringing as korbanos. If you're bringing these rams, bring them all. Obviously, the word mentioning it, is if it's possible to bring all the korbanos. If you could bring all the korbanos in the world, Sheb Olam Ein Moichalin. The Brisa says, obviously pushing people to make the most of the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because the Gemara says here that if a person leaves it till after that time, it's too late. Now, just 1 minute. Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that it's never too late if a person does teshuvah? So this is the kasha. This brisa is a direct contradiction to the statement Rabbi Yochanan made, who said a person at any time can do teshuvah. Answers the Gemara lo kasha. This is very powerful. Ho b'yochid, ho b'tzibor. Wow. It depends if it's community doing teshuvah or it's just individuals. If it's the community together praying for it, it could be for an individual, for themselves, for the particular situation, that can work at any time. Interesting, the Rambam Maimonides paskins this, that the Rabbi Yochanan was talking about, of course, up to, we've got Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur for the verdict and the decree for the coming year, but on top of that, if it's teshuvah, which is done by a community davening for themselves, they're concerned about each other, that has the power even after the decree. That's what the Gemara answers here. Lo kasha b'yochid ho b'tzibor. Says the Gemara, we're still not out of it yet. Meisvei. Says the Gemara, we've got a question, another brisa. Actually, it was last week, Sedra. Einei Hashem elokecha bo. The eyes of Hashem, bo, are on Eretz Yisrael. In which way? Itim l'tova, the itim l'ra. Sometimes, that's what it says, Einei Hashem elokecha bo, me reishis hashana ad achrit shana. Have a look at Rashi. Pa'omim, sometimes, this brisa says, sheho itin hanusunin l'soif hashana. What happens at the end of the year, the times, can be l'toivahi, lohokel oleha min hapuronus, to reduce and weaken any puronus, any negative a decree that was made. It can be lessened. This is very interesting. Hanigza oleo b'Rosh Hashanah. What does that mean? Have a look at the Gemara. How is a decree changed? This is the brisa, and then we'll bring back to Rabbi Yochanan. Says that you've got to begin line the tova. Itim l'tova v'itim l'ra. Itim l'tova ketzad. But notice there's no actual change as such, but we'll see how this reflects on what we've just said before. Ketzad. When it came to Rosh Hashanah, and it means Yom Kippur too, and sadly, Uposku lohem geshomim mu'otim. The decree actually was a very reduced quantity of rainfall, but l'soif chozru bohem. And at the end, when it came towards the end of the year, later on in the year, teshuvah was done. Says the Gemara, lahoisif aleim I efshar. It's impossible to change the verdict. Because the verdict had already been made. In brackets, this is going to be the question against Rabbi Yochanan, but close brackets, and let's continue the brisa. So what will Hashem do if the decree has already been made negatively for a very reduced amount of rainfall, and people during the year do teshuvah? Ela Kodesh Baruch Hu moridon bizmanon. The rainfall will fall at the right time. Obviously, you want that after their sowing has taken place. Al ha'oretz hatzricha lohen, on land that actually needs it. Have a look at Rashi here. Al ha'oretz shetzricha lohen. Have you got it? Shetzricha, beginning of the line. Al hasodos, val hakromim, v'al haganos, fields, vineyards, gardens, but not out in the desert, where rainfall in the desert is of little use for the crops. So what Hashem will do if there's been teshuvah is the rainfall that does come will actually be very useful for the crops. It will fall at the right time after the sowing has taken place. It will fall in the right place. So therefore, even though it's a reduced quantity, it will be very effective. Continue the Gemara. Next line. Hakol lefi haaretz. All according to the land that needs the rain. You with me? So a reduced quantity of rainfall was decreed, but it will fall in the right place at the right time, and therefore they will actually gain and not lose by that reduced rainfall. Okay, says the Gemara, it's in the raw. It could go the other way too. What does that mean? Ketzad hareisha hoyi Yisrael tzadikim gemurim b'Rosh Hashanah uposku aleim geshomim merubim, because they were tzadikim gemurim, having gone through the Rosh Hashanah process, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and they deserved a good rainfall this year. But the soif chozru bahem, and later on they changed their ways. Says the Gemara, livchos mehem efsha. It's impossible to reduce the quantity which was already decreed. Why? Shekava nigzara gezerah. The decree had already been made. Elo HaKadosh Baruch Hu moridon sheloi bismanon. So although the quantity is very large, it actually falls in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sheloi bismanon, the wrong time, maybe before they've even done the sowing. Alo oret she'eina tzricha lahem, on land that actually doesn't need the rain. Have a look at Rashi. Shelo bismanon lifnei hazriya, before the actual sowing, useless. Or v'al oret she'eina tzricha, on land which actually doesn't need the rain. But your ores or midboros, we're talking there about, as we say, desert lands, or a yar forests, which is not helping actually the crops. Oh, says the Gemara, she'eina tzricha lahem. Says the Gemara, I thought Rabbi Yochanan said that teshuvah, particularly for a community we've learned before, communal teshuvah can change everything. So how can this brisa say it's too late, particularly going from this small quantity where there was teshuvah? The Gemara said, well, it's not going to be changed because the decree has already been made. I thought we said communal teshuvah will help at any time. Have a look at the Gemara, please. L'toiva, beginning of the line. L'toiva mio likare, from koroya. Why can't the negative decree be torn up? Yeah, mio likare ligzar dinayu, tear up the decree that was made, if according to Rabbi Yochanan, communal teshuvah will help, and add to the amount, the quantity of rainfall which was already decreed. Remember, the case here is that a small quantity was decreed, the community had done teshuvah, and therefore the Gemara says, well, we can't change, the decree won't be changed, and therefore it falls in the right place at the right time. The Gemara is asking, according to Rabbi Yochanan, why can't the decree be torn up? Answers the Gemara, Shani Hosom. It's different over there in this brisa. Why? The Efsha Bahochi. You don't need to start changing everything. The quantity of rain, if it falls in the right time at the right place, was sufficient to do everything it's meant to do. So why bother to change a decree? It's true, the decree could be changed if teshuvah was done, but it was unnecessary. We've got the same reduced quantity of rainfall falling in the right place at the right time, and therefore it was unnecessary. So this is not disagreeing with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. And then the Gemara brings a further brisa. This is a fascinating piece. Tor Shema, come in here. Yordei Hayom Bo'onios. Now this is very interesting. This is a chapter in Tehillim, and it's Tehillim 107. Now, can I call upon you, please, Peter, Safari have changed their layout. I don't know if anybody's been using it. They've changed their layout. They've improved it. I don't know if you can bring up. Go to Tanakh. Go to Psalms. So coming down the page, Psalms. Here we are. Psalm, thank you very much. We want chapter 107. Thank you. Great performance here. And coming down the page, where do we want? Yodeh Hayom, we want actually verse 23. Well done. Now, this is a very interesting, I think everybody can see that, but it's very good indeed. Zoom in. Thank you. Now, this chapter 107 is a fascinating chapter of Tehillim because it actually talks about the categories of people that need to bench goimel, as we say, to need to give particularly thanks to Hashem. We're talking about people who, there are 4 categories. One of them, of course, were the one we know, someone cured from a serious illness. There's another example there of there are 4 categories mentioned. One of them is being freed from prison. One of them is traveling, journeying through the desert, journeying, and there's final one that we want to look at is completing a sea journey. Look at chapter Pasuk 23, and you'll find that after all these categories, it's, if you have time, worth having a look at this chapter, this of Tehillim. Yordei Hayom Ba'onios, others going down into the sea in ships. Oisein Malacha, doing work, ply their trade, interesting. B'mayim Rabim, great mighty waters. Next pasuk, Hema Roll, they've seen the works of Hashem, V'nifle Oisov, his wonders, the deep waters, etc. And then what happens? By Vayomer, Hashem says, by his word, Vayamed Ruach Sa'ora. Yamed from Loshen, causing to stand, raising a storm, Ruach Sa'ora, because it's a wind. But Teromein Galov, causing the waves to rise, he says surge here. Next pasuk, beautiful. Yalu Shomayim Yehudu Sahoimos, going up to heaven. Can you imagine the wonderful description here of this storm wind and the rain and the rising to heaven, heavenward at least. Yehudu Saim is going down to the depths. You can imagine these people. Imagine it can't be too good for the stomach. Nafshon Baro Sismogog. Nafshon, what it means their souls, Baro Tismogog. He said disgorging. Tismogog is like melting in he says in misery here with raw. Next pasuk, beautiful psukim, 27. Yochogu, v'yonu kashika. They're moving around like someone who's drunk. Kashika v'chol chochmosom tispalo. Tispalo, like swallowed up. Their wisdom swallowed up. They don't know how to deal with this tempest. Next pasuk 28. Vayitzaku el Hashem batzalohem. They're crying out to Hashem. Batzalohem in their difficult times. Hashem is saving them, taking them out. Mim mutsuka means when their narrowness, really, but what it means from their troubles. And therefore, next pasuk 29, Yochom Sa'ora lidmama, reducing the Sa'ora, this tempest, this storm, to a whisper. Vayecheshu galem, becoming still, the waves becoming still. Yeah, by Yecheshu becoming silent. And then what happens? By Yismachu, they are so full of excitement and happiness and rejoicing. Ki yishtoka from the word shtika, when it's all become quiet. By Yanchem, yeah, bringing them El Machois Cheptzom, bringing them back. He brought them back. By Yinochem, bringing them back to the place where they wanted to. And the last pasuk here that we need to look at, Yodul Hashem Chastoi, let them give thanks to Hashem for his kindness, his wondrous deeds to men. Now, follow back up again, please, Peter. Go back. I don't know if people spotted this. Actually, in Tehillim itself, you've got an inverted nun at the beginning of those psukim. Can you see that? You find that as well in the Torah, in Parshas Ba'aloischa, which is dealing with Vayi bin Soya Ha'aron. People may have noticed that. But again, you've here got some inverted nuns. And if you ever get a Tanakh, which has actually been written in a ksav and in, I'm just going to say, written like a sefer, you'd find that actually there are nuns, inverted nuns, in front of these psukim, which are dealing with this tempest, which ultimately the person is surviving that tempest, is coming out of it, and of course giving thanks. But notice you've got these inverted nuns. So if we can go back, please, to our Gemara. Tor Shema. So yes, if we can come back to faces. And back to the beginning of the line, says Tor Shema, come and hear. Yordei Hayom Ba'onios. These are the people going down to the sea with boats. Oisim Malocha B'mayim Rabim. Obviously their jobs are that they're traveling the seas. That's their work. They see here we're talking about the actions of Hashem, and ultimately seeing this tempest. And Hashem says, Vayamed, causing the remember we spent the wind, this tempest, this sa'ara, the storm, but to remain galov, lifting up the waves. Yochogu v'yonu kashika. Yochogu is like a chag. People have been drinking too much during a chag and reeling, if you like. That's how they are. You can imagine walking on such a boat, a ship. And then finally, by Yitzhaku el Hashem Batzalohem, they're crying out to Hashem, Batzalohem, in their time of this difficulty. And then they are saved from this tempest, everything calms down, and they're giving thanks to Hashem. But says the Gemara, this is fascinating. Also lohem simonios, from the word simon. There are signs, ka'achin v'rakin shebatorah. Have a look at Rashi, please. Simonios. Bain posuk leposuk, between each of those psukim, certainly the initial ones, which is talking about this tempest, worth having a look in the Tanakh if you have one. Yesh simonim hafuchim ko zeh. Rashi actually, I can imagine that was in the obviously handwritten, the time of Moshe, of Rashi, well before print. So it's handwritten. He's putting in this inverted nun. What are these inverted nuns? Says Rashi, they are like the word ach for rak that you may have come across in the Torah. If you have the word ach, but, rak only, says Rashi, boin ledrosha. Normally, if you have those words, they come as a drosha to explain, expound, lama'et es hadibor, reducing, minimizing whatever's just been said. If you have a ach or rak only, it's minimizing, Ka'achin v'rakin she mi'utim. Those are words which limit statements. So what does it mean if we've got these signs which limit? Interesting. Says Rashi, Loima, Lo b'chol shor sheyitzaku el Hashem batzalohem yotzihem mimutzu koisehem. They won't always be answered. Why not? Elo imkein tzoaku kodem gezadin. Ooh, this comes as a contradiction again against the words of Rabbi Yochanan. Let's go back to the Gemara, please. Loi malacha. Have you got it? 7 lines up. Loi malacha, these inverted nuns. Fascinating. Tsoaku, yes. And in fact, some people explain these inverted nuns looking a little bit like brackets. In other words, the brackets are saying they're crying out, they're going to be answered, but there's a bracket because it's not always going to apply. Says the Gemara, Loi malchot tsoaku koidem gezadin. This is this brisa. Then, nenin, they're answered. Tsoaku la'achar gezadin eino nenin. They're not answered. So 1 minute, didn't Rabbi Yochanan say in the introductory statement for tonight that the community and the boat, presumably, it doesn't sound like it's a little rowing boat here. It's a ship, a boat, true, in those times, but nevertheless, a boat with other individuals on the boat. Says the Gemara, the question of the Gemara, therefore, is, this is a real tricky question against Rabbi Yochanan, because a boat normally would have more than just 1, 2 people. We're talking about a boat here, on an oniyah, a ship. So there will be plenty of people, and presumably if there's this tempest, you can imagine, particularly as the Pasuk says, they're all crying out to Hashem, save us. So why should the brackets be around these psukim with these particular signs? Rabbi Yochanan said, and we certainly explained Rabbi Yochanan to say our community coming together, praying, and presumably thinking of trying to better their ways, they'll be answered. Why are there brackets around these psukim? In 107, chapter 107 in Tehillim, which is talking about the time to bench Gomer, having been on the high seas with this storm, answers the Gemara, fascinating answer. Hani nami ki echidin domai. These people on the boat are like yechidim, they're like individuals. What do you mean that they're like individuals? If they're on a boat, aren't they all praying for them? They should all be saved. If I can call upon you, Peter, to the 3 attachments I sent, let's look at I think I did it in reverse order, actually. The first one shows you the sefer I'm referring to. Thank you very much indeed. Back to my Hebrew books. Wonderful. This is a sefer called Parshas Arachim, written by Rabbi Yehuda Rosanis. I don't know if people are familiar. Rabbi Yehuda Rosanis died in 1727. He was a Rav of Constantinople. Actually, he was considered, he was a big expert, not just in Hebrew, in Arabic and Turkish as well. And he was appointed, actually, he was the chief rabbi, really, of the Ottoman Empire. But as I say, died in 1727. And there we have him, Rabbi Yehuda Rosanis. And this is the sefer. He writes a pirush called the Mishnah Lamelech. We may have referred to that on various occasions. The Mishnah Lamelech, which is a pirush on the Rambam. But here he's got various droshes that he gave, and therefore it's called the Parshas Arachim. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Rosenis. Okay, if we can go now to the first, or well, after that, the next on page Kuf, no, the one before that one, sorry, Kuf Mem Aleph, yes. And actually, he talks in a long piece, he talks about our Gemara. If you can stroll down, talks about a series, I'm looking at the second column. When we're talking about the Gazar Din, he talks exactly about this point. There we are. If you can bring up the arrow, excellent. Uparich b'Gemara, the beginning of that paragraph down. Yes, the Gemara asks, Ahod omrinon, on that we say the Gazar Din the Tzibor Mikra, that the Gazar Din of a community can be torn up. And the Gemara says, Tor Shema, come in here, exactly our Gemara. Yoredei Hayom, those people going down the high seas, etc. And what happens? And we find that they're answered, but there are these particular signs looking like an inverted nun, looking like a bracket, which tells us that what, if you remember, the Gemara says it doesn't always apply. It only applies if it's a community, but not individuals. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? People on a boat, if it's a large boat, will always be a lot of people. Answers the Gemara, Meshani, Hani Nami, beginning of the line, Kiyechidim Domu. They're like individuals. What do you mean they're like individuals? Imagine you've got a large boat. Why are they like individuals if they're all praying for the storm to stop? And look at this answer, very important answer. Vahanire, it would appear, the great Mishnah Lamelech, Dahamakshan, Olo Badata, the one asking this question in the Gemara, Olo, it entered his mind, the Kivan since, the Kol Yoredei Hayom, all those people going down to the seas, and in particularly when you've got this big tempest, Hey Mispalalim, they're all davening, and they're all davening for it to calm down. Chashive Ketziba, aren't they all considered a community? Answer Gemara says no. V'dochile, the Gemara, like, if you like, pushes aside that question by saying lo, ki ele yechidim domi. They are like individuals. And his question is, what do you mean they're like individuals? Do you remember the Gemara we brought earlier on when we were talking about davening? If you daven, he says, Abul Kosher, we brought this Tosfos actually, where people davening without going into that whole Gemara. But if you remember, if you say you're davening for others, people who are unwell as well, and you say B'soich Sha'or Chole Yisrael, when you're davening for the recovery of a particular individual, and you say B'soich Sha'or Chole Yisrael, that's considered a tefillah. That's considered a tefillah, which is for the community. Why isn't that considered a communal? Go down where it says Vim Kain Kol, beginning of the line is Kol Yoredei Hayom, all those people that have gone to the, as I say, in the boat, Nami Amailo Chashive Katsiba. Why are they not considered a community davening? Very strong answer. V'yesh lo'ina. Deshani hahi. De echot hoyu mispalel al kol ha'cholim. If someone really is davening for all ill people, mishum hochi kashivi katzibor, that is considered katzibor, like a community. If the person is sincerely davening for those other people. But the suggestion of the Mishnah Lamelech is it depends how those people in the boat, in the ship, are davening. V'hu hadin im echot mispalel, if people are davening, I'll call Yordei Hayom Chashivi Katsiba. If they are, say, with sincerity, are davening for all the people on the boat, then yes, of course, that will be considered a communal prayer. But now we turn to the next page. Please, Peter. Yes. Hacholim o Yordei Hayom. Ill people, or even people on the high seas with this storm. Shekol echot mispalel al atzmai. They might all be davening for the calm waters. But if they're all davening for themselves, imagine you've got a boat, nobody knows each other, they're davening for themselves to survive. Ki yechidim domo, that will be considered still like yechidim. That is a very powerful comment. If we come back to the faces, please. What the Mishnah Lamelech is saying is, yes, if you're davening for other people, or you've got the community davening, and they are all concerned for each other, that is communal prayer, and that can knock out any decree. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. However, an individual praying, that's not as potent, and it cannot actually annul a decree. On a boat, it depends how you're davening. If the people are davening and they know each other, they're friends of each other, and they're concerned about each other, and they are really davening for themselves, all to be saved, then that would be a communal prayer. But there's a bracket round that in that chapter in Tehillim to say, if all the people in the boat are praying, they want it to calm down, but they're praying for themselves. Deep down, they're not really worried about the others. They're just hoping that they manage to survive this ordeal of this tempest. They're not really davening for the others at all. They may all be, in other words, you may have 50 people, 100 people davening, but really only davening for themselves. That is considered individual prayer. That's very powerful, because sadly you could have that in shuls as well, hopefully not. That yes, wonderful prayer on Rosh Hashanah, the end of Yom Kippur, with Ne'ilah, everybody davening with, tears for the good year, etc. Are they davening for the others as well, or are they really davening just for themselves? If they're davening just for themselves, it turns out, says the Mishnah Lamelech, very powerful interpretation of our Gemara here, that it just ends up with 100 individual prayers, not potent. Oh yes, we said before Yom Kippur, even individuals have a power to annul a decree. But you cannot call this prayer public prayer. Public prayer is when you're davening, maybe davening for an individual, but davening for individuals and other individuals too who are unwell, or as a community on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or any occasion, the whole community, ba'achdus, is davening for a good, healthy, good, successful year. That's called a public prayer and is very potent, and in the words of Rabbi Yochanan, can even override a decree that's been made. And with that, that's the conclusion of this piece here. Let me just conclude. We started late. Can I ask you, Peter, to bring up Devorim? So it's Deuteronomy. This week's Sedra, chapter 13, Posuk 18. So we're going back now. You may have to go back Yes, Tanakh, thank you. Deuteronomy 13. And it's Posuk 18. This is talking about, sadly, when you have a whole city, I'll say fascinating piece. We haven't got time to really look into it completely here, but it's talking about a city which is worshipping idols. The whole city is worshipping idols, and you'll see there the halachas, how the whole city has to be wiped out, and they're killed there, etc. And that, look at Posuk. And nothing, you shouldn't keep any of this. But look at the end of this Posuk 18. This is after you've carried out the destruction of this city, where the whole city is worshipping idols. And they'll say, worth having a look about that, I'll say, over the next coming days before we get to the end of the week, this week, etc. But the Posuk concludes, for nosan lecho rachamim, v'richamcha v'hirbecha, even though you've carried out this deed of wiping out this whole city, Hashem will have compassion. Interesting, look how it's translated here. Hashem will now turn the nosan lecho rachamim, show you compassion, v'richamcha, and be merciful, I suppose, compassion to you, v'hirbecha, and increase you, yeah, kasher nishpa la'avusecha. Even though you've carried out this ordeal of destroying this city, Hashem will have compassion v'nosan lecho rachamim. Now, if you turn, look at the commentary here, and one of them is on this posuk, the Arachim. Go down, let's see if we've got it here. Arachim, yes. No connect. Now turn to the Aleph. No, we're on the wrong part. Can you click on Posuk 18? Right, there it is. But no translation. Okay, well, I'll see what I can do for you. The Arachim, the great Arachim, translates this. We're familiar with Rab Arachim, Rab Chaim Ibn Attar, 17th century. V'nosan lecho rachamim v'richamcha. A fascinating piece. He translates this not like the English translation on the side, but very differently. Kavonas hamama. What is the intention of this statement? Lefi, because shetziva, there's been a command. Second line, this is called Ir Hanitachas, a city which has been led astray. Sheyahargu koloya, the whole city is killed. Lefi chorev, va'afilo behemtom. Maaseh hazeh, such an action of wiping out a whole city, yoilid teva achzorius, will cause the person to have a midah, an attribute of achzorius, cruelty. Belev ha'odom, very interesting point. A person who carries out actions of cruelty becomes a cruel person. Look at this. Kamoshe Sipra, people may well nod their heads with this statement. Kamoshe Sipru lonu hayishma'elim. Careful, this is being taped. The Yishma'elim, kas harotzchim, this group of killers, murderers, b'ma'ama melech, even though they may be doing this under orders, as it were, ki yesh lahem cheshek godel b'shor shehorgim odam. There's a great cheshek, there's a great desire when they're killing people. In other words, carrying out acts of cruelty has made these people, the Ishmaelim, wow, amazing it wasn't censored, has made them into very cruel people. Look, continue the next line here, fascinating. Have you got it? Bashor, beginning of the line, Bashor sheholgin odom, because they're going out killing people, the deep roots of kindness and compassion has been torn out of them. They become extremely cruel people. And you'll find this point actually embedded. I might have thought the same will happen with people who have to destroy the city which has been led astray. Hashem then particularly gives them a promise. Don't worry, I know you're carrying out this action which externally looks very cruel, and indeed it is cruel, but nevertheless there's going to be a promise because you're doing this as a mitzvah. Hagam, even though shehateva, normally nature, yoilid bohem achzorius, will normally lead and cause you to have this midah of cruelty, Makor harachamim, the source of rachamim, Hashem himself, yashpia bohem koach harachamim, will pour out and give you nevertheless a strength of continuing to be compassionate. Mei chodosh, let's retranslate this. Yashpiarem koach harachamim mei chodosh, from renew this feeling of compassion. Levatel koach hachzoris, to annul the strength of this power, if you like, this midah of cruelty. Shenolad mikoach ha'ma'aseh. So he's translating the nosan l'chorachamim. No, not that Hashem will have compassion on you. Hashem will give you the midah of compassion. And then what? Please scroll down a little bit further, Peter. V'omro v'richamcho, then he'll have compassion on you. Have you got it, the top line? Heir bozer. With this posuk, it's enlightening for you. Shekol zaman she'ha'odom hu begeder tivi achzori. As a person is cruel, exactly what we've been learning the past few weeks, Hashem will deal with him in the same way. Sha'ein Hashem arachim ela l'rachamon. That's why Hashem has to give you the midah of compassion so that he can be compassionate upon you. Beautiful. Okay, let's turn back to faces. Thank you very much, Peter. Very powerful comment from this week's Sedra. In other words, it needs Hashem himself to say, I'm giving you the midah of compassion. Even though you're doing something which looks externally as if it's very cruel, you'll have this midah of compassion. And you have to have this midah of compassion, because if you don't have the midah of compassion, I will not, Shez Hashem, be compassionate upon you, because we have this principle of midah keneged midah. I remember so clearly my grandfather, Zichrono Livracha, my mother's father, Olav Hasholem, he was a sheikhet, and he was what they call gassos, larger animals, cows. And I do remember him coming back in the olden days with his shirt full of blood, spurting out, etc. He could not be a sandik at a bris, because he could not, he said he just couldn't, that the feeling of a suffering of a child, he was so compassionate, but nevertheless, he was carrying out this mitzvah of shechita, although it seems, I might have thought, a cruel, no, it's through by doing this mitzvah, you will still have this feeling of compassion. And he really, when it came to the blood of individuals, he was, even animals itself, but when he was doing the mitzvah of shechita, that he was carrying out, and it didn't affect his midah of achzorius. Let me just conclude. It's rare to have a statement of the Arachim, a posuk in the Torah, which has actually got, as we mentioned here, it could have quoted by Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zichrono Livracha, in one of his teshuvos. And he says the following, we'll conclude with this. If there's a fly in a house, could be even a bee. If it's harming someone, that's a different story. But says Rav Moshe, if you can open up the window and let out the animal rather than kill it, that's what you should do. Clearly, if there's a child there or it might harm you and sting you, that's a different thing. Then, of course, you might kill the bee. But if it's not harming you and it's not going to harm you, like a fly, etc., killing a fly, I think we might have mentioned this principle before, an act of cruelty will have an effect on the individual. So Rav Moshe Feinstein paskins that if you have the opportunity, rather open the window and let the fly out than actually kill it. Because by killing and doing an action of cruelty, it will have an effect on you. As I say, obviously it depends what the situation is, and if there's harm involved, they could with their children or babies, etc., that's a different story. Or even for the individual, if it might harm the individual, that's a different thing. But a fly, try not just to kill flies, squat it, not a wonderful thing to do, because it can cause the person to have this effect, and affect the attributes of the individual, the cruelty. So very interesting coming through from this, etc., tying up with all that we've seen before in our Gemaras over the weeks. Lovely to link it up to the Gemara itself and say not just the Gemara, the Psukim on this week's Sedra. With that, gentlemen, well over time, as it's 20 past 11 here in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I will leave you.
Norman.
Yes.
Hello, Norman.
There's a lot of noise here. Yeah.
Norman, yes. A quick question. Looking at what the prophet Isaiah was saying, and looking what the Gemara is saying, echoing him.
Yes.
Talking about boats and storms and everything like that.
That was Tehillim.
Yes.
Yes.
But it seems to me to be very much a hidden reference to the story of Jonah. But Jonah is not mentioned at all in these comments.
No,
but there in Jonah you have the sailors on the boat who are praying, and their prayers are answered.
Yeah, there it was rather different because there was a reason for that storm. It really was all pointing towards, it was all actually focusing on Yonah himself. It wasn't that there was a decree against the other people. It wasn't a decree against the rest of the people on the boat. The decree really was for Yonah. So it really was, and as we saw, once, of course, he is thrown off the boat, then, of course, it calms down. So it's not so much the prayers of those individuals, it's either they're seeking the source of it. Now, you may be right. I mean, if they're really praying for themselves, and all of them, all the sailors together, maybe they're in all this together, then their prayers actually are answered because they're finding out exactly where the source comes from. So, yeah, a similar idea. If all the sailors are praying for all the safety of all individuals, that would be classified as a public prayer. But here, it was very much focused. They were looking for what was it that was causing this. And in fact, of course, it turned out it was Yonah himself. So it wasn't a decree so much against all the individuals on the boat. If there's a decree against, and they're trying to do teshuvah, then what this pasuk would tell us, yes, pray, do teshuvah, and then hopefully it's got an opportunity. Of course, we don't know the ultimate cheshbonos and the calculations of Hashem, but yes, the power of prayer, if it's focused on all the individuals, is called a public prayer. Where in the case of Yonah, he wasn't interested at that point. It was focusing on him. It was really trying to remove him from the boat because he was the source of all the misery. It wasn't their actions which needed teshuvah. It was Yonah who was the source of the problem, which they managed to find out ultimately. So I hope that answers your problem. It wasn't that the decree was against the sailors in the ship. The decree was against Yonah. They just had to find out who he was, or who was the source. And then, of course, everything does quieten down once he's thrown off. But it's very powerful the way you can have many people davening, and nevertheless, it's all considered individual prayer, rather than coming for public prayer means when everybody's davening for the whole community. And you may have found the same thing with Yonah, where the sailors maybe are davening for them, for all of them, rather than just on an individual basis. But very powerful, this idea of ensuring that we are praying for others too, and of course with sincerity, and then the prayers do become public prayers, and that's really what we want.
Normally, intuitively, you would think all the sailors together in one ship were literally all in it together. But the Gemara says something entirely the opposite. The opposite.
No, you're right. There are brackets there to say not always. Doesn't say never, not always. That's the point. The brackets there tell us sometimes yes, sometimes no.
I see.
It depends how they do. You're absolutely right. If if they all feel they want to be saved, then of course. But if they're not, they're really saying, well, I don't mind too much what happens to the others. I know, yeah, of course, obviously you can't have a storm for one is a storm for all. But, if they actually fall off the boat, it doesn't bother me that much, as long as the storm stops. But that's the brackets. The brackets, as you saw in the Gemara, means sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Yeah.
And that's you're quite right. You'd think they're all in this together, and absolutely, if they are in this together, and they are thinking about each other, they all want to, a group on the boat together. Then you're right. That will be classified as public prayer. But if they're everybody's just got a ticket, then and they're not interested. Rather different than perhaps the cruise that you were on, Peter. Perhaps they're all enjoying themselves together as one big happy family. Then that's rather different. Yes, we've got a question for Malcolm.
When Jonah finally says that he has to be sent, they then realize before that they're praying to each one to their God. That's what they say. Everyone pray to your own God on board, and then they find him, and then afterwards they all acknowledge Hashem, as it were, from Jonah's action. So at that moment, they are all, as it were, together as a body, and at that moment the storm abates. So in a way, his gesture is to help them come together as a. Because
yes, I see what you're saying, but it is different there because the focus was always on Jonah himself. It was Jonah who his job. He was the cause of this temper. He was the cause of the storm. Whereas normally, if you had all these people, let's say on the boat, where the idea is for them all to do some type of teshuvah, that's rather different. There, the cause, they were trying to find the cause. So it's not as if there was a decree. Had he not been on the boat, it sounded like there wouldn't have been a decree against all the people on the boat. It's only that he was there and he was the cause of this misery. So it is slightly different, but I hear what you're saying. You're saying actually he's causing them to do teshuvah themselves, but it wasn't they were looking for teshuvah necessarily. We've got the Coast Guard. hopefully is doing a good job there. So with that, gentlemen, any other queries? We can leave it. It's even dark in Normandy now, as we see. We got some lights in the back. So
That's it.
so thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Can I just